There's a kind of daughter who grows up without drawing too much attention. Not because she's shy, not because she has nothing to say, but because somewhere along the way, quietly, instinctively, she learned that life goes more smoothly when she doesn't disrupt the emotional balance of the room. She reads the mood like a weather forecast. She lowers her volume before being told. She notices the flicker in someone's eyes and recalibrates mid-sentence. Not because she's trying to manipulate, but because she learned, subtly and early, that ease is rewarded. Smiles came faster when she nodded instead of pushing back. Tension eased when she stepped aside. Her opinions, when softened, made the room more comfortable. So she adjusted. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough to make herself a little smaller, a little quieter, a little easier to manage. No one asked her to do this. No one had to. Because the world around her responded better to the version of her that didn't take up too much space. And so, she learned to reduce herself. Not all at once, but inch by inch. And the more she disappeared, the more praise she received. She's so polite. She's wise beyond her years. She never causes trouble. And she believed it. Because it didn't feel like performance. It felt like being good, like being loved. But adaptation isn't always a conscious decision, especially for children. For sensitive children, especially daughters, adaptation is an act of survival dressed up as maturity. At school, she followed the rules. At home, she kept the peace. In photos, she smiled right on cue. And when it hurt, when her feelings were too big for the room, she simply swallowed them. Not because she wanted to, but because it felt safer that way. Because the only version of herself that consistently earned connection was the one that caused the least friction. There's a difference between being peaceful and being quiet out of fear. She didn't learn that until much later, because no one talks about the cost of being easy to raise. No one asks what gets lost in the process of becoming a child who's praised for their emotional efficiency. What does it mean to be agreeable? Who benefits from that ease? And who does it eventually harm? It doesn't start with a dramatic moment. There's no one incident to point to. It begins in the small things. The sigh from a parent when she interrupts, the glance away when she cries, the subtle change in energy when she says something too intense. No one punishes her outright. Instead, they correct her gently in 1,000 subtle ways. Don't be so sensitive. Lower your voice. It's not that big of a deal. These aren't acts of cruelty. They're acts of calibration. And children calibrate fast. They learn the emotional rules of the household long before they can name them. They don't need to be told outright what's welcome and what's too much. They simply notice what earns affection and what doesn't. So the body adapts. The nervous system shifts, breath shortens, muscles tighten. A child's biology rewires itself to prioritize safety. Not just physical safety, but emotional belonging. Because to a child, losing connection feels like danger, and this adaptation is rarely recognized as survival. It's praised as personality. By the time anyone notices, it doesn't look like something that happened to her. It looks like who she is: mature, composed, emotionally intelligent, a model daughter. But what they're really admiring isn't a personality. It's a protective pattern, a nervous system that's been trained to anticipate discomfort and neutralize it before it escalates. Psychologist Donald Winnicott called it the false self, a version of identity created in response to an environment that can't tolerate a child's full emotional truth. And the false self isn't fake. It's not a lie. It's an act of intelligence, a kind of negotiation. I'll be who you need me to be so I can stay close. Later, Gabor Mate would describe this conflict as the battle between authenticity and attachment. When a child senses that her real feelings might cost her connection, she chooses attachment, every time, even if it means burying her truest self. The shift happens gradually. A slight pause before speaking, a scanning of faces before finishing a sentence, a quiet belief that anger, sadness, or even joy might be too loud to be safe. She doesn't stop feeling, she starts editing, and that editing becomes reflex. Eventually, she forgets what her unfiltered self even sounded like, what she would have said, done, or felt if survival hadn't been part of the calculation. Her feelings start arriving already trimmed, already filtered for palatability. This isn't repression in the classic sense. It's something more complex, more insidious. It's emotional translation. She still feels, she still reacts, but she's constantly reshaping those experiences into forms that won't make others uncomfortable. And because it works, because people keep rewarding her for it, she never has a reason to stop. Her emotional intelligence gets praised, her maturity admired, her calmness interpreted as inner strength. But being predictable isn't the same as being whole, and being agreeable isn't the same as being honest. There's a particular kind of loneliness that grows inside someone who always adapts to the room, a kind of hollowing out. Because every time you change your shape to keep others comfortable, you lose a little bit of the shape you started with. She laughs on cue, even when nothing's funny. She apologizes before anyone's offended. She volunteers to help, not because she wants to, but because her presence has always had to justify itself. These aren't just habits. They're survival strategies. They're rehearsed until they feel like home. And the world, it claps. It claps for the girl who never makes things messy, who smiles on command, who doesn't disrupt. But the applause doesn't mean she's seen. It just means she's non-threatening. It just means she's become digestible. Underneath the applause is a nervous system still on high alert, still scanning for emotional cues, still managing everyone else's comfort before her own. This is the tragedy of the false self. It's not that it lies, it's that it becomes the only version anyone recognizes. And eventually, even she starts to believe it. She doesn't remember the moment it began, not because it wasn't significant, but because it was so quiet, so slow. There was no trauma to point to, no explosion of conflict, no shattering of trust, just small adjustments, micro decisions, a tightening of her voice here, a hesitation there. Her body kept the score before her mind even caught on. The first signs were subtle, a throat that tensed before speaking, a breath she held without realizing, an instinct to scan the faces around her before finishing a thought. These weren't quirks. They were signs of a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do, protect her. Not from danger in the physical sense, but from the threat of emotional disconnection. The fear that if she took up too much space, if she felt too deeply, reacted too strongly, expressed too honestly, she might lose her place in the room. So she learned to edit herself, not with intention, but with instinct. And over time, the editing became identity. She didn't stop feeling. She stopped trusting what she felt. She didn't stop wanting. She stopped believing her wants mattered. And this is the part people often misunderstand. She's not emotionally repressed. She's emotionally fluid, but in a second language. One designed to be non-disruptive. One designed to keep the peace. She's mastered the art of being digestible. She offers only the versions of herself that won't make anyone else uncomfortable. And it works. People say she's easy to talk to, that she's emotionally mature, that she's calming to be around. But what they're really praising is her emotional efficiency, her ability to regulate not just herself, but everyone else around her. She becomes a thermostat for other people's comfort. And slowly, she forgets how to tune into her own. The body notices, even when the mind doesn't. At first, it's restlessness, then fatigue, then a strange dissonance, a life that functions perfectly on the outside, but feels increasingly foreign on the inside. She goes through the motions, relationships, work, friendships, but something's missing. Not something dramatic, not something anyone else can see, just a sense that she's slightly misaligned with her own life, like she's walking through a home that has her name on the lease, but nothing that feels like hers. This isn't depression, it's not anxiety, not exactly. It's disconnection, it's presence without embodiment, a version of herself that shows up, smiles, supports, but doesn't settle, and the world doesn't notice. Why would they? She's still kind, still responsible, still so easy to be around. But she knows, her body knows. It feels the cost in sleepless nights and overactive thoughts, in that buzzing behind the eyes when the room finally goes quiet, in the way her breath never fully settles, even when nothing is wrong. Stillness doesn't feel safe to her. Stillness means scanning stops. And when you've spent your whole life anticipating the next emotional ripple, stopping feels like vulnerability. So she stays alert, always ready to soothe, to smooth, to adjust. This isn't just psychological, it's neurological. It's what psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk describes in The Body Keeps the Score. Trauma that's stored not in memory, but in muscle, in breath, in posture. It's what Gabor Mate calls adaptive survival, the nervous system sacrificing authenticity in exchange for safety. And for women, this pattern often goes unnoticed because it doesn't disrupt, it doesn't offend, it's not volatile or chaotic. It's quiet, controlled, socially rewarding. When you learn that being lovable is tied to being pleasant, you become a master at reading the room. You develop what looks like intuition, but is actually hypervigilance. You start responding to needs before they're spoken, adjusting your energy based on someone else's discomfort. And the more fluent you become in this emotional translation, the harder it becomes to speak your native language, the one that isn't filtered for someone else's ease. But no one teaches you how to return to that original voice. No one teaches you how to take up space again when you've spent decades learning to shrink. And so when someone finally says to you, "Tell me how you really feel," freeze. Not because you're withholding, but because you genuinely don't know. Your emotions have been passing through a filter for so long, they arrive to you already diluted. You're not numb, you're mistranslated. You ask yourself questions like, is this what I feel or what I'm supposed to feel? Do I want this? Or do I just know how to be good at it? Is this connection? Or just performance? It's a strange kind of grief to realize that your entire emotional vocabulary might be built on safety, not truth. To realize that the calm people admire in you is actually the result of a system that's always bracing for impact. You want to scream, but the scream has no words. You want to cry, but the tears feel unjustified. You want to be held, but don't know how to ask without first downplaying the need. And this isn't just about childhood. This pattern follows you into adulthood, into love, into friendship, into work. You become the one who listens deeply, who makes space, who supports. But rarely, if ever, do you allow yourself to be supported. You've been trained by silence, by reward, by repetition, that your role is to adjust, to smooth, to keep things from breaking. But what if you're breaking? What if the emotional labor of constant regulation has worn you thin? No one sees it, because you still smile, you still show up, you still know how to say the right thing at the right time in the right tone. But inside, you're tired, not just from doing too much, but from never being fully in anything you do, from always watching yourself, adjusting mid-motion, calculating impact before intention. And here's the cruel irony. The better you are at performing emotional ease, the less likely anyone is to ask if you're okay. Because you're the stable one, the calm one, the one who never makes things complicated. But you're not okay. Not really. You've just become fluent in hiding the cost. This is what emotional efficiency steals from you. Not just your energy, but your voice, your instincts, your map of self. Because every time you edited a feeling, a need, a truth, you also blurred the shape of who you really are. And eventually, the version of you that everyone loves becomes the only version you know how to be. Even if it's not the full you, even if it's just a highly functional ghost, it doesn't happen all at once. There's no single moment she can point to and say, "That's when I lost myself." No dramatic rupture, no explosive breakdown, just a slow, silent unraveling, a quiet, daily choosing of others over self. Not out of generosity, out of necessity. Adaptation becomes so seamless, it starts to feel like personality. And when you've been adjusting for long enough, you forget there was ever anything underneath to adjust from. At first, it's subtle. She loses interest in things she once loved, but shrugs it off as growing up. She hesitates when asked for an opinion, not because she doesn't have one, but because she doesn't trust it'll be welcomed. She defers decisions, big and small, because she's learned that her preferences often come second anyway. And slowly, without resistance, without protest, the internal outline of her identity begins to blur. She's still herself, still functioning, still polite, still calm, but the core of her, the part that feels solid, anchored, unmistakably her, starts to vanish. This is the architecture of erasure, not loud, not violent, but systematic. It begins with a single silence, then another, and another, until her inner world becomes a museum of unspoken wants, untouched needs, unreleased grief. What's dangerous about this kind of disappearance is that it doesn't look like pain from the outside. It looks like competence. It looks like emotional intelligence. It looks like peace. But it's not peace. It's quiet. And quiet can be a form of suffocation when it's not freely chosen. Inside, there's noise she can't name. She rehearses conversations before they happen. She replays them afterward. Not because she said anything wrong, but because she spent her life monitoring impact more than expressing truth. Her nervous system runs like a machine that's never allowed to rest. Even in stillness, it scans. Even in safety, it prepares. Even in joy, it anticipates the moment it might end. You'd never guess it, because she's doing fine. But ask her how she's really doing, and she might freeze. Not because she's being evasive, but because she genuinely doesn't know. When your emotional life has been run through the filter of what's safest for others long enough, you stop being able to locate how you feel. You don't lie, you just translate, constantly, automatically, until even your own reactions feel like secondhand impressions. This isn't just about people pleasing, it's about identity distortion. It's about living in a version of yourself so calibrated to others' expectations that you lose access to the raw, messy, beautiful chaos that makes you you. This is what D.W. Winnicott called the false self, a psychological adaptation built not to deceive, but to survive. A structure assembled over time in response to a world that rewarded pleasantness over presence, compliance over authenticity. The false self isn't fake, it's functional. It's what got her through, and it was praised endlessly. You're so mature. You're so easy to talk to. You never cause any drama. And every compliment like that carved a deeper divide. Because what she learned over and over again was this: you're lovable, but only in certain forms. You're safe to keep around, but only when you stay small. And so she became fluent in minimizing. She apologized for things she didn't do. She laughed at jokes that made her uncomfortable. She offered help before being asked, not out of generosity, but out of compulsion. Because if her presence wasn't actively helping, it felt like a burden. This isn't empathy, it's over-adaptation. This isn't kindness, it's conditional belonging. What gets lost in all this is not just spontaneity, it's sovereignty. The ability to move through the world on her own terms. The right to say no without guilt. To say yes without calculation. To want something without scanning the room first to see if it's okay. And when you live this way long enough, something terrifying happens. Even your desires become indistinct. Even your emotions feel secondhand. You feel something, but before you can name it, your brain runs it through a dozen filters. Is this appropriate? Will this make anyone uncomfortable? Should I even feel this way? And by the time you reach an answer, the feeling itself has vanished. Not because it wasn't real, but because it was too raw to be allowed. She doesn't explode, she erodes, and no one notices, because she still smiles, still shows up, still knows how to keep the room light. But inside, the cost is mounting. She lives with a low-grade ache. Not pain exactly, just a sense that something's missing, that she's adjacent to her life instead of inside it. And it haunts her, not because she knows what's wrong, but because she doesn't. Because when you've been wearing the mask long enough, you forget there ever was a face beneath it. There's a loneliness here that's hard to explain. Because she's not alone. She's surrounded by people. She's connected. She's admired. She's successful. But the connection doesn't touch her. The admiration doesn't land. The success feels hollow. Not because it's fake, but because it was never built with her real self in the room. She was there, but not fully. Present, but muted. Alive, but paused. There's a term in psychology for this: depersonalization. It's when you feel like a spectator in your own life. When your body moves, your voice speaks, but you're watching it all from a few feet back. It's the cost of chronic emotional suppression, of self-monitoring turned into self-abandonment, of existing as a projection rather than a person. And the world doesn't just let it happen, it rewards it. You're so stable, so chill, so unbothered, so low maintenance. But being low maintenance is not a virtue when it's rooted in fear. When it means you never express need. When it means you don't even check in with yourself to see if you have one. Eventually you become invisible, not because no one's looking, but because the version of you they see isn't the one who needed to be found. So what happens when the mask finally starts to crack? Not violently, Not all at once, but slowly, subtly, like a thread unraveling from a fabric you didn't even know was stitched shut. It doesn't begin with rage. It doesn't even begin with clarity. It begins with confusion, with the quiet discomfort that creeps in during moments when everything is still, when there are no cues to respond to, no moods to manage, no conversations to shape, when the world goes quiet and there's no one left to mirror. And in that silence, the question rises. What would I be if I stopped responding? At first, that question terrifies her, because so much of her identity has been built on responsiveness, on knowing what to say, how to say it, when to laugh, when to stay silent. She's built a life inside the lines others drew for her, and stepping beyond them feels like trespassing. But underneath the fear, there's something else. A flicker. Longing. Not to be dramatic, not to be disruptive, just to be whole. And this is where healing begins. Not with a grand declaration, but with a quiet decision to stop editing her existence. It starts small. She lets herself pause before answering. She notices when she says yes too quickly. She begins to question her own reflexes. Do I actually want this? Am I agreeing out of desire or fear? Is this silence mine or just inherited? These aren't easy questions. They're destabilizing, because for someone who's lived on adaptation, even stillness can feel like rebellion. But that discomfort, it's not a threat. It's a signal. It means you've started to return to yourself. Reconnection doesn't come all at once. It's not linear. Some days she feels powerful, alive, grounded, clear. Other days she questions everything, grieves what was lost, and doubts what's ahead. And that's okay. Because healing is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world taught you to shrink. It's about unlearning the compulsions that once kept you safe, but now keep you small. It's about replacing performance with presence, agreement with authenticity, harmony with honesty. And that takes time. It takes permission. It takes making peace with discomfort. Because reclaiming your voice means you might say things that unsettle the room. You might disappoint the people who were used to your quiet compliance. You might even confuse yourself, because desire, once buried, doesn't always rise up in clean sentences. Sometimes it just shows up as restlessness, as a craving for solitude, as a sudden refusal to explain yourself. That's not regression. That's emergence. Because healing isn't graceful. It's awkward. You'll overcorrect. You'll set boundaries too harshly. You'll say, "I'm fine," when you're not. And then realize you don't want to live like that anymore. You'll feel the old programming tug at you like gravity. Don't be too much. Don't make things harder. Keep it easy. Keep it light. But slowly, those voices get quieter. Not because they disappear, but because your voice gets louder. And the more you listen, the more you remember. You were never meant to be digestible. You were never meant to disappear in order to belong. You were meant to take up space, to speak when it's risky, to rest when it's inconvenient, to want things that don't make sense to anyone else. You were meant to be whole. And with that realization comes grief. Grief for all the times you abandoned yourself to keep the peace. Grief for the dreams you postponed because someone else needed you more. Grief for the version of you that never got to grow because she was too busy managing everyone else's emotions. But with that grief also comes grace. Because now you know. You can come home to yourself, not all at once, but in layers, in moments, by letting your no mean no, by letting your joy be loud, by feeling your anger without guilt, by telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. And that truth, it's not always eloquent, it's not always easy, but it's yours. And once you taste the freedom of living without translation, once you feel the ground under your own feet, not the scaffolding built for others, you'll never want to go back. You'll stop apologizing for your depth. You'll stop minimizing your needs. You'll stop shrinking in rooms that were never meant to contain you. And when someone says, "You've changed," you'll smile. Not defensively, but gently. Because they're right. You have. Not into someone new, but back into someone real. Into someone who no longer lives as a mirror, but as a flame. Not easily managed, not always convenient, but finally, unapologetically alive. And when you live from that place, from the center of your own being, from the full palette of your emotions, from the clarity of self-recognition, you don't need to perform. just arrived. And that, my friend, is the beginning of freedom.